Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, training camp starts today, and we know who's on the final training camp roster for the Wolves. Does anyone have an inside track on the last roster spot for the Wolves? We'll talk about the non-roster invitees, the guys who may end up with the Iowa Wolves, and the overall structure of the Wolves roster as we head into training camp with the preseason opener on Saturday. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hopefully you're having a fantastic start to your week. And today is the first day of Timberwolves training camp. Yesterday was media day. Today, we're going to break down the Timberwolves training camp roster, the 13 standard contract guys, and everything. There's 21 players on the roster. Only 13 of them are on regular standard full NBA contracts. We'll talk about that roster structure, the other guys on the roster, the training camp invitees, and who has NBA experience, who might have a shot at cracking the Timberwolves roster when they break camp, because they can carry up to 15 players when they break camp. So we'll break that all down, kind of try and handicap the situation for you here as we head into training camp. And yes, we are just 4 days away from actual Timberwolves basketball. Yes, preseason, but still, real basketball is coming this week. So a lot to get to today. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can watch on YouTube. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So Timberwolves had media day on Monday, and there's some great quotes floating out there, some great clips, so make sure to check it out from all the beat reporters, and the Timberwolves as a team released a bunch of stuff on social, so go check it out. Just it feels like overall less notable quotes coming out of this media day. It's somehow maybe less exciting than like when the Wolves were bad and there was just this optimism that the Timberwolves could surprise people, and now it's a little bit of what I talked about on Monday's show that Chris Finch discussed in his conversation with Britt Robson of Min Post, of the weight of expectations. Now it's different when everyone's expecting you to sustain what you've done and improve upon that as a true contender versus up and coming, versus a team that has no expectations. There are a ton of expectations for the Wolves. And that was kind of the tone of media day. You know, obviously discussion about Ant talked about improving his handles this offseason, working with his trainer to improve his handle, and Rudy Gobert talking about working with ball security, ball handling, part of that as well, but being stronger with the ball in the paint, being more decisive. Dante DiVincenzo talking about his health, lots of good stuff out there. And of course, overall expectations still remain very high, and the Wolves were not shying away from that. I want to start with a bit of the roster breakdown. What does this thing look like for Minnesota? Training camp starts today. They have workouts today, Wednesday. They fly to San Diego on Thursday, and then they have another practice on Friday before their preseason game on Saturday. So a lot happening this week. The game, of course, on Saturday is against it's the Clippers, right? I believe it's against the Clippers on Saturday in San Diego. So a lot to look forward to this week. And of course, it's against the Nuggets. Why did I think it was the Clippers? San Diego Clippers? I don't know. But that's who they play on Saturday, is the Nuggets in their neutral site preseason game. So let's talk about the structure of the roster and how it breaks down right now. There's 13 players on standard, fully guaranteed contracts. Okay. NBA teams can have up to 15 when the season starts. In the offseason, you can have up to 21. Now, of those 21 slots, 15 can be standard contracts, 3 are two-way contracts, or up to 3 can be two-way contracts. And then the rest of the spots are non-guaranteed deals. When camp breaks, the roster has to be down to 15 plus 3 two-way. So inevitably, then, there's at least 3 guys who are currently on contracts that are going to be waived, and potentially more depending on the structure of those deals. Minnesota only has to carry at least 14 guys when they break camp. They don't have to carry a full roster of 15 to start the season. There's a certain number of days in a year the Wolves would then have to fill the roster entirely. Remember, a couple years ago, they did that There's a couple different ways. Remember, they had Luka Garza. They promoted him from a 2A to a full roster spot. There was, they signed 2 years ago. TJ Warren ended up with the roster spot toward the end of the year. So there's a lot of different ways they could solve that later if they don't keep everybody now. So let's break down what it looks like. The 13 guys are the 13 guys that, everyone knows who these guys are, right? It's your starting five. It's your first three off the bench: Dante DiVincenzo, Naz Reid, and TJ Shannon. That's your first three off the bench. Beyond that, it's Jalen Clark, it's Rob Dillingham. Those are the next guys up in the rotation. And then the other guaranteed contract players, that's right there. That's what, 11 guys. The only other guaranteed contract guys that's 10 guys, are Joe Ingles, Leonard Miller, and Jean Beringer, this year's first-round pick. That's it. That's your 13. The 3 two-way guys, this year's second-round pick, Rocco Zakarski's in a 2-year two-way deal. Tristan Newton's back on a 2-way deal. He was on a 2-way deal last year. Was not in camp with Minnesota. Remember, was with the Pacers. They, I think, claimed him off waivers in December from Indiana and finished the season with Minnesota. He's back. And then Enrique Freeman, who we spent some time talking about a couple weeks ago, was one of my favorite college prospects a year plus ago, and a little bit of an undersized big, but high energy, great rebounder, good athlete, all that stuff. Those are your two-way guys. Okay, so that's 16 of the 21 spots. There's one player reportedly on a partial guarantee. Now, remember, the Wolves don't announce any contract details, but reportedly it was Michael Scotto at Hoops Hype that reports that Bones Highland has a partial guarantee of $425,000. Now, that's not insignificant, and I'd be surprised if Minnesota didn't keep him after training camp. But he's the 14th guy. My guess is he becomes the 14th guy. I don't think they're just going to flush that money. I think he makes the team as the 14th guy, which means there would only be one roster spot available, and there are 4 players then on training camp deals, which is what that's what I'm referring to this as, but non-guaranteed deals. There's, they're getting paid for being in camp, obviously, but there's nothing that counts against the cap moving forward. There's 4 guys that fall into that category. We talked about Johnny Juzang a couple weeks ago, maybe about a week ago. He is the guy, the one player with the most NBA experience, was with Utah in their rotation the last couple of years. And we talked about him the other day. And then there's 3 new ones: Jules Bernard, Zion Pullin, and Elise Johnson, all of whom have played in the NBA, all of whom have some NBA experience. Elise Johnson by far with the most, Pullin and Bernard very limited experience. And so really for most of the rest of the show today, I want to dig into what each of those guys has done, how they profile, and who, if any of them, would have an inside track potentially at a 15th roster spot if Minnesota chose to keep somebody. And I guess I'd throw Juzang into that same conversation. Juzang actually got brought up in the interview with Britt Robson that I discussed yesterday, but I didn't get into the Juzang stuff. So we'll talk about that as well. But I want to focus on the 3 guys that I have not talked about yet on the show. So we'll do that here next, and that's what we'll do for most of the rest of the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is here. Week 4 is now in the books, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Of course, Week 5 starts. It's hard to believe we're already with Week 5 into Week 5. Bye week start this week, but there's NFL action starting on Thursday night. It's 49ers at Rams, which, yes, we know there's no Brock Purdy. We know the Rams are playing well, and LA is favored by 5.5 points at home. But the 49ers are still 3-1. They still got Christian McCaffrey. They're still a good team. I don't hate Niners plus 5.5, honestly. Minus 115 for Niners plus 5.5 on Thursday night. If you don't want to bet that game, you can also just look ahead to, the Vikings have an early game, have a Europe game again on Sunday. They play the Browns and are favored by 3.5 points against Cleveland. Of course, Cleveland upset Green Bay a couple weeks ago and then was beat handily by Detroit in Detroit this last weekend. Vikings are favored by 3.5 points on the neutral site game against Cleveland. You can bet on those games straight up. You can do live betting during the game, which is a fun way to handle when there's one game at a time, like Thursday night, also Sunday morning, that early Vikings game. You could also do same game parlays. That's a ton of fun as well. No matter what you like to do, if you're a casual fan, you just love diving into the stats, FanDuel will make the game day experience for you so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Let's talk about these three players. We'll talk a bit about Juzang as well and who potentially would have the best shot at cracking the Wolves roster. If you're not familiar with how this works, again, these roster spots are non-guaranteed. So traditionally at the end of training camp, these guys will all get waived. They may see some training camp, some preseason game time. I would imagine most of these guys, it'll still be kind of garbage time toward the end of preseason games. It's more part of the reason some of these guys are brought in is to balance certain positions in training camp. And I'll explain what I mean by that here in a second. But don't expect any of these four players to necessarily make the Timberwolves team out of training camp. However, again, one of them could. Two, if they eat the salary in Bones Highland, if they really love somebody, more likely than not, these guys all end up with the Iowa Wolves. We saw the Wolves sign and then waive three players here in the last couple of weeks. CJ Fulton, Nate Santos, and there's one other one from last week that they signed and waived, and I'm blanking on who it was, but there were three players. They did that to retain their Exhibit 10 rights, essentially, which means if they stay in the G League with the Iowa Wolves for the next 60 days, they each get bonuses of a little over $85K. It's like $85,300. And so there's an incentive for the team to do it, to retain these guys if they like them and get them within their G League system, and a benefit to those guys because they get the guaranteed $85K. And so understandable why that transaction would take place. So let's go on down the list of these guys, and I'll tell you who I like the most from them. Let's start with Jules Bernard. Jules Bernard was a UCLA guy and was actually there at the same time as not Jalen Clark. Who's the other UCLA guy on the Wolves roster? Oh my goodness. I don't think it was Jalen Clark. I think he was there at the same time as Juzang, actually. So they both played at UCLA. Bernard actually did get into 19 games with the Wizards a couple of years ago. Shot 38% from three, about 8 minutes a game across the 19 games. Has played a ton in the G League, and that's really where a lot of Bernard's experience comes from. The overall profile, before I get into the stats, is he's a guard, really more of a combo guard. He's big. He's 6'6", so he's much bigger than your traditional point guard. He's a good passer. Not a great passer, but he's a good passer, especially for his size, which is why I say he's a combo guard that certainly can run the offense. In college, he had a crazy low turnover rate and, looked like a high IQ player. That turnover rate hasn't been quite as strong in the G League, although I guess the context there is that the G League is a breakneck pace, up and down, tons of transition, lots of possessions kind of league. So maybe that's not all that surprising. So that all profiles really well, like a relatively smart player, relatively good passer, big for a guard, very athletic. The problem is he's not a consistent enough defender or shooter to really have a lot of success as a professional. The G League stats the efficiency isn't where you'd want it to be from somebody who like can score a lot and there's upside there. Like he's played, how many G League games has he played in? Like over 100 G League games over the last couple of years. I guess over the last 3 years. Let's see, I have the number here. 114 G League games over 3 seasons with G League teams for Washington. Of course, he was there a couple years ago. I believe he started with the Pistons G League team, was on the Cleveland G League team, the Charge in Canton. Or I guess they used to be in Canton. They're in Cleveland now. Last year, overall in the G League, he's averaged 17 points a game on 44% shooting and was in the Summer League with Golden State this last summer. I would have concerns with what I mentioned a moment ago, the actual 3-point shooting, and I know the college number is okay. What we've seen in the G League, though, across those games, I mentioned, 43% from the field? 45, no, that's college. 44% from the field overall. The 3-point shooting, though, is like 33-ish% across the board in the G League, actually a little lower than that. It's right hovering around right around 33%. And we're not talking low volume. Remember, we're talking about 100 plus games. This is like 400 or 500 3-pointers, and he's 33%. As a combo guard, you really want to, with volume, you want that number to be better. And it's frustrating. The turnover and assist to turnover isn't great. I mentioned the turnover rate's higher, and there are multiple reasons for that. Different systems across different leagues or different teams, within the G League, but the assist rate isn't all that high either. So he really is a shooting guard that's a below average shooter who's not quite a good enough passer to play point guard and certainly not consistent enough defensively. So there's certainly some upside there. in terms of because of his athleticism combined with his size. He's still relatively young. He doesn't turn 26 until January. So I think he is kind of a classic G League player. And if he had developed that shot or maybe become a better defender over the last 3 years, this would be a bit of a different conversation because, again, the physical profile's there. The talent with the ball in his hands is there. I'm actually the least excited about him of the three guys we're talking about today, frankly. So, or at least I shouldn't say least excited. Well, yeah, that's probably the right way to say it. I just don't know what the fit is there and what the potential upside for Minnesota is. So I would be surprised, very surprised, if ultimately Jules Bernard was somebody that the Wolves kept around beyond just being in the G League with the Iowa Wolves for his fourth different G League team in 4 seasons. Okay, so Bernard, athletic combo guard, good passer, smart player, good decision maker, but not good enough defensively or consistent enough as a shooter to really be an NBA caliber roster, even not even rotation, but even roster guy, in my opinion. My favorite one, my favorite, not necessarily who I think would have an inside track, but I like Zion Pullin a lot. I think Zion Pullin's a really interesting player. He's more of a traditional point guard. And of course, I've clamored for a long time on this show for the Wolves to get somebody else on the roster who can initiate an offense. And I know Minnesota just wants big players that can push pace as kind of alternatives to a traditional point guard. I suppose Bones Highland is more of a he is a point guard, but he's more of a scoring point guard. But Zion Pullin, I like. He's a bit smaller, and he's certainly less athletic than like a Bernard, but he's a really good shooter. Pullin is 6'4". He played 4 years at the was it College of Charleston? No, UC Riverside. He played at UC Riverside for 4 years, then transferred to Florida. In his 5th year, when he was at Florida, he averaged 15 and a half a game. He averaged 18 in his last game at UC Riverside. 55 points a game, 15 and a half points per game, 5 assists per game at Florida. And he shot 45% from 3, just 44% overall from the floor, but was much better at UC Riverside before that in terms of his shooting from the floor. Overall, as a 3-point shooter in college, 38%. And 3 of his 5 seasons, he was 39% or higher, including his last 2 seasons. And again, just a shade under 45% as a 5th-year senior at Florida. The volume is relatively low. He never shot more than 78 threes in a game. In a year. Man, 78 threes in a game would be impressive. 291 threes over 5 years in college. So relatively low sample. But again, 38% and 45% as a senior on 78 attempts. Not bad. The modest athleticism and the modest size is the primary concern when you're looking at Pullin as an NBA prospect. But I think he does all the point guard stuff really well. He's a good defender. He's a good passer. He makes smart decisions. And again, he's an accurate shooter. It's really kind of a profile. I actually saw a comp somewhere to Tyus Jones. He doesn't remind me that much of Tyus, but that type of a profile guard. The shot isn't like super smooth. It's a relatively slow release. He can score in isolation, but again, as a modest athlete, there's only so much he can do there. I think he's a good, not great scorer because of his good, not great athleticism and modest size, but he's good in a pick and roll situation. He can initiate offense. He knows how to use a screen. There is a little bit of Tyus to him in that sense. So I like him as a prototypical kind of third point guard. The counter there is, and what I think Minnesota is doing is they just want another guy that can run offense at training camp to run, if they run like a white, blue, black, 3 teams in training camp and they have a third team. Like they want another guy who can initiate offense. You can almost play a Mike Conley-like role. There's some similarities to Mike Conley. I don't think he's as athletic as prime Mike Conley. I think prime Mike Conley was probably a better scorer. And that even was a skill that took Mike a little bit to develop, but I think he was perhaps a better scorer than Pullin is now. But I think Minnesota wants him in camp because they want another point guard. I don't think he realistically has a chance of making the team because Tim Connelly and Chris Finch, like outside of Mike Conley and Monte Morris, I mean, those guys over the last few years have been kind of the exceptions that prove the rule. And I guess Jordan McLaughlin, who was already in the organization when Tim Connelly and Chris Finch joined, but they're kind of the exception that prove the rule that Finch and Connelly want big athletic guys who can do more than just lead an offense. And they're not, and by that I mean that's not a primary skill set of theirs. Like I talked about on Monday's show, Chris Finch referring to Nickeil Alexander-Walker as a push guard, an athletic guard who's going to get the ball up the floor, get into the offense, force things in transition. And that's not Pullin. Zion Pullin is a more traditional type point guard. And so I would be surprised if Minnesota said, hey, look, this is the kind of guy we need in the fold. Like, look at the two-way guys. Like Tristan Newton is a combo guard. He's not a point guard. They didn't use a two-way slot on a traditional point guard last year either. So I think this is really, truly a purely training camp related signing. Like, hey, we want another guard in here. That's my take on that. We'll talk about the last guy and then a bit about Juzang here at the end, and that's how we'll close out the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Simply put, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. There's plenty that they can help you with. Maybe it's finding old 401ks from past jobs, maximizing investments, increasing your savings rate, whatever the case might be. Again, you don't want to be letting financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. All right, the last name of somebody the Timberwolves brought in for training camp is Elise Johnson. And Elise Johnson is somebody who, if you're a diehard NBA fan, you may have heard of. He was actually a draft pick. The other two guys that we talked about today went undrafted. Johnson was the 20th pick of the second round by the Pacers in 2018. So we're going back now 7 years. Elise Johnson is already 29 years old. He's actually been out of the NBA for the last 2 years. Elise Johnson has played in 76 overall NBA games over 5 years and with 6 different NBA teams. Drafted by the Pacers in 2018, he spent 2 years with the Pacers, 1 year with the Brooklyn Nets, and then in 21-22, he split between 3 teams, the Bulls, Wizards, and Pelicans, played 4 games with the Spurs in 22-23, and then played in Japan and hasn't been in the NBA again since 2023. And obviously modest numbers. Elise Johnson is a forward. He's really an undersized power forward. I actually think there's some similarities in terms of playing style and also size. He's taller than TJ Shannon, but the wingspan, the standing reach, all that stuff is pretty close. And there's some similarities in terms of playing style, what you're expecting from him. He's like the power forward version of TJ Shannon. By that, I mean versatile, good ball handler, plays really hard, versatile on the defensive end as well as the offensive end, and has a nose for the ball. For TJ Shannon, I think Elise Johnson coming out as a draft prospect, there was more expectation for him defensively than there has been for Shannon. Shannon wasn't great defensively at Illinois. People looked previous to that, what he did at Texas Tech, and said, all right. And what I thought watching clips of him both at Texas Tech and Illinois was, this is a guy at Texas Tech. I'm not talking about TJ. I am talking about TJ Shannon now. He was more invested defensively. At Illinois, he had to do too much offensively and got caught up in that and wasn't as active defensively. We've seen at the NBA level, TJ Shannon's not going to be, at least not now, the superstar like he was at Illinois offensively. So he's got to contribute defensively, and that can then, of course, lead to turning defense into offense for himself and for his teammates. Elise Johnson, I think, is kind of the opposite, where I think there's more that he provides defensively. The offense needs a little bit more work. Now, he's nowhere, obviously, going to be near what Shannon could be and is currently as a scorer. But Elise Johnson is kind of that tough two-way guy with a nose for the ball, a good passer for his size, could be kind of a push forward, if you will, right? Like there's a little, he's not Julius Randle, of course, but I think on both ends of the floor, can guard big threes, small fours, can finish okay in the paint. There's some concern there. I think there's some, and who knows? I mean, now he's been a professional for a while. Like if you look back at what some of the scouting reports were around the time he was drafted, there was some question about basketball IQ and the ability to make good decisions on both ends of the floor. And maybe that's something that's worked itself out. I think for Elise Johnson from Minnesota, this is, it's interesting that he's not just automatically playing overseas. So I wonder if there is some additional incentive for him being in camp. I'd be surprised if he just went and played with the Iowa Wolves. At the same time, I'd also be surprised if they use their last roster spot on him. Like he's an NBA caliber player, NBA caliber body, has been around a little bit, can do a few of those kind of Swiss Army knife-ish type things for Minnesota. And they love those types of players. And there isn't a whole lot of front court depth for Minnesota. So my take is he's versatile front court depth. More of a, and he's not Naz Reid. And please don't hear that, but a Naz Reid-esque archetype, not prototype, more Naz Reid-esque archetype than say a Rudy archetype, right? Like Rudy and Rocco Zikarsky are one, Jesse Edwards, who isn't with the team anymore, was that archetype. Jean Beringer is kind of his own thing. I would put Elise Johnson kind of in the Naz, not quite a Beringer type of, I guess, silo or column. Like it's a different type of big. This gives you a very light version, a facsimile of Naz in that regard, with a little bit of that two-way versatility, the ball handling skills. And, I think that's probably what the Wolves are going for here is a camp body, which sounds bad, but what I'm getting at there, somebody who can play, the part on another one of those training camp scrimmage teams. I think that's what we're getting with Elise Johnson. Although, again, the NBA experience and the professional experience, if somebody goes down, if something happens, he's somebody that I'm sure they would be comfortable giving a roster spot to, as long as they're being careful with, that second apron stuff, which of course is going to be front of mind for the Wolves all year. But that's kind of my take there. Of all these guys, Johnny Juzang is probably the one that would have the inside track. He would be the first man up when it comes to a roster spot. He's somebody who is a good shooter, 36% as a pro, 37.5% last year, 42% the year before that on limited volume. But he played in 64 games, started 18 for Utah last year. And he is a huge shooting guard who's a good shooter. The concern there is all defensively. And Chris Finch said this in the Britt Robson interview at Min Post. He acknowledged, hey, Finch said Juzang should be a better defender than he has been. And they're hoping they can unlock that with him because of his physical profile. And what he does offensively is already kind of NBA caliber. The issue is mostly, can he have any level of consistency defensively? It's hard to play and frustrating to have a 6'7" shooting guard who isn't a great defender. And I think there's enough athleticism there that he should be a good defender. So is it technique? Is it, being in the right scheme and understanding how these things work? We'll see. But Juzang, if anybody had the inside track, I'd go Juzang, then I'd go Elise Johnson second. And then after that, I guess if I had to pick, I'd go Pullin ahead of Jules Bernard. But I don't think either one of those guys realistically have a chance. So we'll see how this thing all shakes out. Keep an eye on it. Hopefully we get to see some of these guys in preseason. My hunch is that starters will play maybe a quarter, maybe half of the first quarter, half of the second quarter. As we get rolling here in preseason is typically how that works. And we may get to see some of the end of the roster guys as training camp and as preseason wears on. So we still got a week full of shows every day right now, Monday through Friday, and looking forward to that preseason game on Saturday, but lots of content to come throughout the week. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, you can check out the Locked On NBA Top 100 player list voted on by our experts who cover these teams and players every single day. Check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts to listen to more about the list. I spent some time 2 weeks ago talking quite a bit about it as well here on this show. So feel free to go back and listen to those episodes. Of course, Locked On Wolves podcast is also part of the very same Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.